They say the water in this valley remembers the ones who saved it. In a hidden valley deep within the Ozark Mountains, they say the springs only flow for those who once saved them. If you protect the water will protect you, even if you've forgotten how to believe. The truth: there are beings that have lived quietly beneath limestone beds for centuries, guarding the flow of ancient karst rivers. When man tries to break that sacred balance, they don't attack. They awaken. This story is based on real journal entries left by Ada Merrick, a reclusive mountain midwife, and the only known person to be saved by Bigfoot and forgiven. In this tale, you'll witness a mythical creature stepping out of shadow and into grace, a woman finding redemption in the eyes of what once terrified her, and a valley that rises from within the earth to repay a long-held debt. In the spring of that year, during a flash flood, a massive figure threw itself into the raging waters to save 3 human lives. No one believed it, until the final photograph captured Bigfoot kneeling beside a stone well, leaving behind a round karst rock as a silent thank you. If you skip this story, you might dismiss it as just another legend. But in Laurel Hollow, when the rain falls, you can still hear the water whisper what it never forgot. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? I'd love to greet you properly, wherever your story begins. Under the heavy hush of spring rain, Ada Merrick stood at the edge of her porch, oil lamp trembling in her hand, its flame flickering with each distant rumble. The night around Laurel Hollow had thickened, swollen with water and the scent of sodden earth. The old boards beneath her bare feet moaned low, remembering too much. The sky cracked open again, a wide snarl of white light dragging across the black, and for a second, she saw it. Something vast and hunched by the horse shed, cradling something smaller, wrapped in its arms. Then gone. No howl, no rush. Just gone. The kind of silence that comes when the world knows better than to scream. She didn't move. The wind pressed her nightgown flat against her bones, dampening her hair like fingers of the past. Her eyes stayed locked on the dark where the figure had been. There wasn't fear in them. Not anymore. Only a slow, hollow ache that had learned to coexist with the unknown. She whispered to no one, voice rasped and low. You saw the well. The roof of the grain barn had caved in sometime before midnight. Rusty nails bent like paper clips, hay scattered in the rain, soft as feathers in a drowned field. But it was the well that hurt worse. A deep rumble earlier had knocked loose the stone collar. Now the water frothed muddy and thick like a wound freshly opened. Ada had lived too long in this land not to feel when something beneath it shifted. This wasn't runoff. This was pain. She shuffled across the yard, lamp low to the mud. She followed the trail without meaning to. Prints the size of her skillet, pressed into wet clay. Bare, wide, heavy with weight, and not just the physical kind. Whatever had walked through her yard had carried grief. That she recognized. The prints led away toward the tree line, but she didn't follow. The woods weren't for her tonight. Not yet. By morning the clouds had thinned, though the sky stayed gray. Ada moved slow, her joints creaking like old cupboards, her boots squelching across the sodden ground. She made her way to the well, expecting to see more collapse. But something had changed. There, stacked at the seam of the broken ring, were stones. Smooth, wet, deliberate. Not haphazard, placed. Moss had been stuffed in the cracks. On top, laid gently as if from a careful hand, was a bundle of fresh, wet grass. Still glistening, still green despite the storm. Ada crouched, stared, then reached out with the tenderness of someone cupping the side of a child's face, brushing the edge of the moss. It was soft, almost warm. She sat there on the slick ground, her palm resting on the patched rim. The sound of the water below had softened, clearer. like it had found its way again. A single drop fell from the brim of her hat into the well, and for a moment, it felt like something exhaled. Ada didn't question it. The world didn't know her reasons anymore. She had buried those the day Clara Vance died in her arms. After 23 hours of labor and a stillborn child, Ada couldn't bring back. She hadn't touched a birthing room since, hadn't trusted her hands with anything fragile. That grief had made her quiet, and that quiet had made her invisible. But this silent act in the rain, it had the same cadence as a lullaby, or a prayer. She leaned closer to the rim and whispered again. Someone knew she was hurting. Inside the house, the clock ticked without rhythm. The wind tapped against the windows like a knuckle trying to remember its way home. Ada brewed tea, not for the warmth, but for the ritual. Something to hold. She didn't look toward the woods, but her shoulders stayed turned that way. Her hearing had gotten sharper over the years. When you live alone long enough, every sound becomes a syllable in a story you weren't meant to hear. That night, thunder didn't roll. It cracked. Sharp, quick, like bones snapping. Ada didn't sleep. She sat on the old chaise by the window, lamp low beside her, watching the sky perform its cruel ballet. No movement outside, no return. Only the feeling of something unfinished. She wrapped a quilt tight around her knees and stared at the dark, waiting for a breath that wasn't hers to fog the glass. Come morning, Theo arrived. 16 and all limbs, still thinking he was invisible in his movements. He didn't knock, just barged in like he always had since he was 5. You left the back gate unlatched, he muttered, brushing wet hair from his eyes. I fixed it. Didn't leave it, she said, voice rough from disuse. Theo looked at her, unsure if she was joking. She wasn't. He moved past her to the kitchen, pouring cereal without asking. Huckle, the old mutt they shared between houses, nosed the screen door open and padded in like a ghost in his own right. His fur was damp, flecked with burrs, but his nose twitched with alertness. Ada didn't mention the prince. Not to Theo. Not yet. But something in her posture had shifted, and the boy felt it, even if he couldn't name it. Later, while she hung linens under a sky that still refused to clear, Ada spotted Theo by the tree line, staring too long. Huckle beside him, tail stiff, ears forward. The boy didn't move until she called his name twice, and even then, he didn't answer. Just turned and walked back, expression unreadable. That evening, she returned to the well. The moss was drying now, brittle at the tips. The stones still held, but someone, or something, had placed a new pebble on the edge. Perfectly round, water-worn, not from her land. She picked it up and felt a strange warmth. A memory that didn't belong to her. Not a vision, not a dream. Just a knowing. Like someone had left behind a thought too heavy to carry any longer. When she went to sleep that night, it was with a stone beneath her pillow. The dreams were not hers. They smelled of cedar and wet fur and blood. In them, something cried not with sound, but with the slow, wet rhythm of grief pooling on stone. She woke just before dawn, chest tight, lips salt-touched like she'd wept in her sleep. Outside, the wind had died. Not a leaf stirred. The air was waiting. In the stillness, she heard it again, just once, like breath drawn through a hollow reed, deep from the woods. Not a call, a remembering. And Ada, sitting on the edge of her bed, hand pressed to her chest, felt something shift. A fracture sealed not with force, but with empathy. The kind that runs silent, like water underground, carving paths for centuries before anyone notices. She stood, wrapped her shawl tight, and moved toward the door. The forest hadn't changed, but she had. And something in the way the dawn light hit the moss on the stones told her the hollow was watching too. Not with malice, not with fear, but with the same quiet attention that she had once reserved for the heartbeat of an unborn child. It was the beginning of something neither wild nor tame, just old, and wounded and waiting. The wind picked up again, gentle this time, brushing against her cheek like fingers familiar with loss. She closed her eyes and whispered, "You're not alone," then turned toward the trees and listened. For the second time in her life, she didn't feel like the only one who remembered. The mist hadn't lifted from the ridge yet, and down in Laurel Hollow the cold clung low to the grass, wet with the memory of last week's rain. Theo pressed his hand flat to the muddy slope, squinting at the prints barely visible beneath the morning dew. They weren't there yesterday. Wide, deep, toes splayed like a man's, but not a man's. He looked back once, toward the house, but Ada was still inside, still probably asleep, or sitting by the window like she always did now, holding her coffee with both hands as if it was something fragile. Huckle's ears twitched beside him. The dog wasn't barking, just sniffing the air, tail held stiff, body tense like he was listening to something too quiet for humans. Theo crouched lower and touched the edge of one of the tracks. He wasn't sure why, but he did it gently, like it might bruise if he pushed too hard. Huckle huffed. Then the dog moved forward, slow and deliberate, nose low, weaving between bramble and fern with the confidence of an old scout. Theo followed, ducking under dripping limbs, pushing aside the veil of fog that curled and tugged at his jeans. The farther they went, the quieter it got. No birdsong, no squirrel chatter, just the sound of breath and the soft crush of boots on wet earth. They crested a ridge where the trees thickened, and that's when Theo saw it. A crack in the limestone, wide enough to crawl into, hidden behind a screen of ferns. Moss grew thick along the edges, and the entrance exhaled a smell like rain-soaked stone, and something older, something sweet and metallic. Blood, maybe. Huckle paused, one paw raised, then nosed forward and vanished inside. Theo's heart kicked once, then he followed. The cave was cold, not winter cold, bone cold. The kind that curled in through your sleeves and made your skin feel thin. He reached for his flashlight, but the beam barely cut the dark. The walls were damp, streaked with green, and the floor sloped down, deeper into the earth. Huckle had stopped a few yards in, ears flattened, tail tucked low. He wasn't growling, just watching. Theo raised the light, and that's when he saw it. In the corner, slumped against the stone like something dropped from a great height, was a figure. Massive, coated in mud and hair so matted it looked like roots torn from the riverbank. One leg was twisted under the other, and even from here Theo could see the angle wasn't right. Blood had dried in dark streaks along its side, but it wasn't dead. Its chest rose and fell, slow and heavy like the breath of something trying very hard not to wake the world with its pain. In its arms was a bundle, small, wrapped in layers of wet moss, pressed tight against its chest. For a moment, Theo thought it might be alive, but the stillness gave it away. There was no breath, no twitch, just a weight the creature hadn't let go of. Theo stepped closer, slowly, breath shallow, not daring to blink. The creature stirred just slightly. One eye opened, huge and dark, reflecting the light back at him not like a beast's, but like something old, something watching. Theo didn't run. He couldn't. His legs wouldn't let him. But he raised both hands, palms out, like he'd seen rangers do in training videos. The eye blinked once, then again. Huckle didn't move. A low sound filled the cave. Not a growl, not a moan. Something deeper. A kind of mourning that vibrated in Theo's ribs. He felt it in his throat before he understood it in his mind. Grief. Not rage, not threat. Just grief. Thick and unmoving, like the kind that presses down on a room after a funeral. He whispered, "It's okay," but the words were dust in the air. Behind him, a soft shuffle, then another light. Ada. She stepped into the cave like she'd known it all along. No flashlight, just her lamp, flickering against the rock. Her breath fogged the air in front of her, but she didn't seem to notice. Her eyes locked on the creature cradling the bundle, and she inhaled. Sharp, like something had reached straight into her gut and tugged. She knelt without a word, setting the lamp beside her, pulling a roll of cloth from her bag. She'd brought it. She'd known. Not the specifics, but the kind of knowing that lives in the back of the heart, under the scars. Theo watched as her hands moved with the calm of memory. She tore strips of linen, wet them with clean water, and reached for the wounded leg. The creature didn't stop her. She worked slowly, steady as breath. Washed the wound, set the bone, wrapped the joint with care like she'd once done for a dozen women in labor, holding their trembling hands, whispering things only they could hear. The creature flinched once, then went still. When she was done, she leaned back, wiping sweat from her brow. Her eyes moved to the bundle. The moss was dark now, damp with more than water. Ada reached, gentle, and peeled it open. It was small, too small. Fur soft and fine, like the undercoat of a deer fawn. Its face was still, eyes closed. Perfect, gone. Ada didn't speak. She just sat there for a long moment, shoulders low, head bowed. Then she reached up, pulled the scarf from her neck, and laid it over the child's form. Not to hide it, to honor it. She looked at the creature, its face slack with exhaustion, but its eyes still watching her, and said, "No child deserves to die cold." The creature moved, slowly, like the wind shifting through a field. It leaned forward, head lowering toward Ada, and pressed its brow lightly to her shoulder. Not hard, not heavy, just enough to be felt, just enough to say something she couldn't translate, but understood all the same. Theo stood frozen, breath caught somewhere between reverence and disbelief. The silence inside the cave deepened. Not empty, but full. The sound of water dripping from the stone above echoed like a heartbeat, steady and slow. It filled the space like a hymn. They stayed until the lamp guttered low. Then Ada stood, knees stiff, breath shaky, and nodded once to the creature. "We'll come back," she said, though she wasn't sure if it understood English. Some things don't need translation. Theo followed her out, turning only once to see the creature settling back, arms still curled around the bundle beneath the scarf. Its eyes closed again, not with sleep, but with something heavier. Outside, the sky had begun to clear. The mist was lifting. The trees glistened with early sun. Theo didn't say anything for a long time, and Ada didn't push him. They walked back in silence, the trail behind them already softening with fresh dew. At the edge of the field, just before they reached the house, Theo finally spoke. His voice was quiet, unsure. "It let you touch it." Ada nodded. He asked, "You weren't scared?" She looked out over the ridge to where the treetops trembled in the morning light and said, "No, just sad." Huckle walked between them, head low, tail loose, as if carrying something fragile in his own way. That night, Ada sat by the well again. No moss this time, no new stones, just the sound of water, clearer now, like it had remembered where it came from. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Somewhere, deep in the earth beneath the hollow, grief pulsed like groundwater, ancient, slow, and waiting to be felt. And in her chest, something had begun to loosen. Not release, not yet, but shift. Like maybe, just maybe, there were still things in this world that remembered how to heal. Under the dead heat of mid-July, the air in Laurel Hollow turned thick and motionless. The kind of air that didn't just press against your skin, but crawled inside you, clung to your ribs, and made your lungs work harder than they should. Even the insects moved slower. Horses stood in the shade with sweat crusting on their flanks, and the creek that usually sang its silver song beside Ada's porch now whispered like it was forgetting the words. Something had shifted underground, and the ground hadn't decided yet how to speak it. Coulter Nash stood at the edge of his limestone pit. Boot heels kicked up on a rail he'd bolted into the rock himself, arms crossed over his chest, surveying the shallow channel his crew had just blasted. The water from the karst aquifer hissed as it hit the baking ground, steam rising like ghosts. He wiped the back of his neck with a red bandana, tucked it back in his pocket, and called down, "Keep it coming. I want that trench to the sluice done before nightfall." The men down below moved like ants, shoulders sunburnt, eyes squinted against the dust and heat. The pumps roared louder as the diverted water rushed across raw earth, carrying with it the last breath of the spring-fed stream that had once fed the hollow. Ada heard the difference before she saw it. At first, it was just the silence of what should have been. The breeze from the west no longer carried the smell of cool stone and damp ferns. The birds had changed their songs. The frogs didn't call at dusk. When she leaned over the edge of the well, what she heard wasn't a voice, but an echo of thirst. She walked the property like she used to walk a birthing room, slow, listening, knowing that pain didn't always scream. Sometimes it barely whispered. The grass near the barn had gone stiff. The moss along the north fence flaked like ash. She checked the spigot near the feed trough and watched as the water trickled out in spurts, brown at first, then nothing. By noon, the neighbors had started to murmur, the kind of murmurs that curled like smoke, low, slow, and angry. First at the market, then near the post office, then out front of the hollow diner, where Sheriff Pike sipped his iced tea and tried to look like he wasn't hearing the same thing from every direction. "Ain't right. Never seen the creek run dry in July. He's taken the water, I'm telling you. Might not be Nash. Could be something else, something in the woods." That one always came quieter, always with a glance toward the tree line, as if the trees might listen. By the time the third week of drought clawed its way through the valley, the sundered stream bed cracked open like old skin. Children threw rocks into it out of habit, but the stones just clattered uselessly against dry shale. At night, people swore they heard movement. Not coyotes, not deer. Something heavier, something careful, something watching. Theo sat at the kitchen table, pencil scratching across the edge of an old map he'd found in Ada's attic. It didn't show the new roads or the quarry, just the original water lines, the natural paths of the springs before the dynamite and the pumps. He drew over them with ink, added new lines, new interruptions. Beside him, Huckle thumped his tail but didn't move from his spot near the door, nose twitching toward the open window, ears alert. Ada didn't ask where the map came from. She only asked, "You sure about that bend there?" and pointed with a worn finger. He adjusted it by half an inch. She nodded. Across town, Sheriff Pike had finally driven out to the quarry himself. He parked his cruiser crooked in the dust and walked out past the perimeter fence without waiting to be waved in. Coulter saw him coming and didn't flinch, just leaned forward and spat into the dust. "You damming up the creek again?" Pike asked, voice flat, like he already knew the answer. Coulter grinned, eyes hidden behind dark lenses. "I'm redirecting a bit. Temporary. We're just using runoff. Nothing unlawful." Pike didn't smile back. "You need a permit for that, especially if it affects the hollow's water source." Coulter shrugged. "What's a permit to a dry rock?" The sheriff looked past him to the machinery growling over the lip of the limestone pit. He saw the channel carved into the soil, the muddy trail where the spring used to bubble clear and constant. He saw the crew, saw how fast they looked away when he looked at them. He said, "You're done here. Shut it down. You want to appeal it? Go to the board." Coulter leaned in, voice low enough to carry bite. "That old lady's got you spooked. She got you chasing ghost stories now, Sheriff." Pike didn't answer, just turned and walked back to his car. That evening, under the soft orange haze of another breathless sunset, Ada stood at the edge of her field and watched the forest. She didn't need to look at the cracked soil or the curled edges of her garden leaves to know it was worse than last year's drought. The land was pulling inward, recoiling like something ancient had been disturbed beneath it. She whispered, "You're looking too, aren't you?" Not to the trees, to whatever moved behind them. And something answered, not in words, not in sound, but in the shimmer of movement far between the trunks, a flicker of fur, the hush of massive weight that left no track, then gone. Later that night, Theo waited until Ada's light went out before grabbing his backpack, the map, and a small flashlight. Huckle followed without command. The boy walked north, past the old fence, past the dried cattails where the spring once pooled, and into the belly of the trees. The woods didn't resist him, but they didn't welcome him either. Just watched. He followed the faint remnants of the original stream bed, stepping over roots and slick stones, the map clenched in one hand, the light weaving through branches like a ghost's finger. He didn't know exactly what he was looking for, only that something down there needed to be seen. Near the edge of the old ravine, where the karst ridges jutted out like bone, he found the first mark, a smooth groove carved into limestone. Too high for a person, too deep for erosion. It looked like a handprint, but broader, the fingers longer, as if pressed there in grief, or prayer, or warning. He traced the edge with his fingertips, breath held. Something moved below. He stepped back, heart racing. Huckle growled once, low, uncertain, but didn't bark. The dog backed up, pressed to Theo's leg. Theo crouched, pulled the notebook from his bag, and began copying the mark. Not just the shape, but its angle, its placement. He added the new coordinates to the map, drawing a dotted line from the quarry to this ridge. It wasn't exact, but it was close enough. Back at the quarry, Coulter hadn't stopped. He'd waited 2 nights, watched the sheriff leave town, then brought the crew back under the moonlight. No permits, no tape. Just machines and men and the promise of profit. They worked quieter this time, but the ground still knew. The karst groaned beneath them, the stone refusing to forget. They struck something hard. Not rock, something older. The water surged up not with welcome but with fury. Mud and stone belched upward like lungs rejecting poison. One of the pumps failed, another jammed. A man slipped on the wet stone, shattered his wrist. They kept digging. Theo returned just before dawn, his map now a tapestry of interference. He laid it out on the table, hands trembling. Ada didn't ask where he'd been. She only looked once, then again, slower, at the red lines carving across it, at the handprint sketch, at the circles marking where the stream used to flow. She said, "He's killing it." Theo nodded. Huckle whined low, and in the distance, from somewhere far beyond the ridge, came a sound not born of man, the echo of stone shifting, the cry of something remembering its own buried name, and then silence, but not peace. Under the weight of late summer, Laurel Hollow lay like a breath held too long. The days stretched dry and still, air hanging with the smell of warm stone and dust. The sky each morning started with a thick white fog that rose from the limestone itself, as if the ground was sweating out its own unease. And that morning, when Theo didn't return for breakfast, Ada felt something shift, not in the air, but inside her chest. A quiet, sharp tightening. She set her coffee down without sipping and listened. No birds, no footsteps, just the hum of stillness, unnatural in its quiet. She didn't panic. Ada Merrick had lived long enough to know that worry made your hands shake, and she'd never been any good working with trembling hands. Instead, she stood, laced her boots, and took the walking stick from the hook beside the door. Huckle was already up and waiting by the steps, his nose twitching in the air, tail stiff. She gave him a nod, and they set out. The fog was thicker toward the edge of the ridge, white like breath on a mirror, hiding the tree line in long drapes. The ground sucked at her boots in places, not from mud, but from dryness cracking beneath the topsoil. She didn't call Theo's name. No sense in stirring what didn't want to be stirred. But she followed instinct the same way she'd once followed contractions, counting the pressure shifts in her knees, the coolness in the air when stone gave way to hidden water. It was Huckle who found the first mark. The dog stopped short, nose to a limestone outcrop, tail twitching low. Ada approached, squinting in the pale light. There, carved into the side of the karst wall, just above eye level, 5 long grooves, deep and clean. A handprint, but not a man's. The span too wide, the fingers too long. Not a warning, not this one. It faced inward, toward a narrow slit in the rock, like a door left ajar. She pressed her hand against the stone just beneath it and felt the faintest pulse of cool air. A sigh. She stepped forward, brushing aside the curtain of moss, and ducked into the crevice. The passage was tight, but the light behind her pushed through, dancing across the wet stone in streaks of silver. The floor sloped, slick with condensation. Her boots found footing on natural steps, shallow but deliberate. Huckle moved beside her, silent except for the soft pad of his paws. And then the narrow space opened. It was like stepping into the ribs of the earth. The chamber stretched high above her head, the walls glistening like the inside of a shell. On one side, a slow drip echoed into a shallow pool. But what caught her was the markings. Everywhere, etched into the limestone, some faded, some fresh, were hand signs, symbols, spirals, and lines that curved like river bends. Not random, not chaos. It was a map of memory, a language carved with patience, pain, and purpose. She stepped closer and saw one mark repeated. A large palm, always open, always carved beside the same curve of a stream. The protector, the water keeper. And then, at the far end of the chamber, she found what Theo had found. His notebook lay open on the stone, weighted by a smooth, round rock. Beside it, fresh etchings, crude lines, a map overlaying the valley, with new disruptions scratched through the middle like a wound reopened. She ran her hand over the drawings, then turned at the sound behind her. From the far end of the chamber, Theo emerged, ducking beneath a low arch. His face was pale, streaked with dust and sweat, eyes wide but calm. "I didn't mean to worry you," he said softly, voice swallowed by the stone. "I followed the marks. I thought they'd lead to something, and they did." He stepped aside, revealing a second figure behind him. Not Bigfoot, not this time, but another carving. A towering figure etched in full into the limestone, arms outstretched, palms downward over a spiraling pool. The Guardian. Ada stared up at it, the curves of its body echoing the shape of the hollow itself. The carving was old, weathered by centuries of breath and time. She touched its chest. Damp, smooth, the stone felt almost like skin. "They've always been here," she whispered. "Long before us." Theo nodded. "And they've always been watching the water, guarding it. And now we're taking it, ripping it from under them." She closed her eyes. The pulse beneath the stone felt fainter than it had before. The dripping water echoed louder in the silence, like a heart struggling to keep time. "We have to stop it," she said. Outside, the fog had started to lift. They followed the symbols carved along the rock, marks like footsteps, like invitations, leading them out a back path that spilled into a dry ravine. The path was narrow, lined with sedge and the brittle bones of last season's wildflowers. And along the way, Ada noticed something. The limestone walls that bordered the path weren't just random cuts. They bore handprints too, but these were smaller, repeated in patterns, almost like song lines. And in the center of them all, one print stood out. Ada recognized the cloth pattern of her own scarf, pressed into the stone by a creature's hand the night she'd tended to its wound. It had marked her gesture, not as a transaction, but as something worth remembering. By the time they reached the edge of the clearing near the lower valley, The sun had risen just enough to break the fog, and standing in its light, visible through the branches, was the creature. Taller than Theo remembered, broader, its fur damp and heavy with the morning air, but its posture was not hostile. It stood facing a wide slab of limestone, one massive hand trailing across it in slow, deliberate strokes. It was drawing, not carving, drawing with the dark, wet earth, leaving behind another line that connected stream to stream, ridge to ridge, and marked the places where water once moved, where it had been safe, before the machines, before the channel, before Coulter Nash. The creature turned, its face still unreadable, shadowed under its brow. But its eyes met Ada's with a calm that was not human, but not wild either. It knelt, slow, controlled, and touched its chest. Then it reached down, took a piece of smooth stone, and held it out. Ada stepped forward. Her fingers brushed the stone as she took it, and a shiver passed through her wrist. Not cold, something older, like touch remembering touch. She looked down. Etched faintly into the rock was a circle. Inside it, a single line curved like a stream bending around a root. She understood. This wasn't a gift. It was a direction, a request. Theo stepped up beside her, breath shallow. It wants us to show them. The town, Sheriff Pike. They won't believe maps and symbols, but they might believe us. They won't believe any of it, Ada said, but her voice was steady. Not until the land screams. And it will, she thought. Soon. Behind them, the creature faded back into the mist, its shape dissolving between the trees like breath from a dream. Theo kept the notebook close to his chest the whole way back. Ada didn't speak. Her thoughts moved like water under ice, quiet but unrelenting. Back at the house, the well had gone nearly dry. She dipped the bucket, but it only scraped the sides. And when she listened with the old wooden stethoscope, what she heard wasn't the usual gurgle of the underground spring. It was silence. Not death, but a pause, a warning. That night, the wind picked up again, and from the woods came the sound of stone being touched. Not struck, touched, etched, like someone pressing a memory into the bone of the earth, so it wouldn't be forgotten. And somewhere, deep beneath Laurel Hollow, something turned over in the dark. Still watching, still waiting, still protecting. Under a sky smeared with bruised clouds, the rain didn't begin gently. It came down like a warning, hard, fast, mean. By late afternoon, Laurel Hollow felt like it had been swallowed whole by a storm that didn't just fall from above, but rose from the ground beneath. Thunder cracked wide across the ridges, rolling like the sound of trees snapping in a war no one could see. The earth had been dry for weeks, pulled tight by the quarry's theft and the silence of the streams. Now it couldn't hold the weight. The water was coming back all at once, angry and uninvited. Down at the edge of the unauthorized dam, the ground was shifting. The runoff trench Nash's crew had carved too deep, too fast, now ballooned with brown water that churned like muscle. Banks that once held solid were sloughing off in clumps, and the trees that lined the bend leaned like tired men about to collapse. The barrier, meant to divert, never to withstand, trembled under the weight of its own trespass. Sheriff Pike had been out since dawn, mud up to his knees, trying to call in backup from the county office, but the radios were choking on static, and the road in from the east had already washed out near mile marker 12. He stood by the back of his cruiser, soaked through, hand pressed against the window, whispering curses that vanished into thunder. The rain wasn't going to wait. Neither was the dam. At the Merrick house, Ada already had her boots on before the third thunderclap. She'd known it was coming. Her body always felt storms like an old dog does, aching joints and pressure behind the eyes. Theo was rolling up the map, sliding it into a plastic sleeve and stuffing it in his pack. Huckle paced by the door, whining low. "It's not gonna hold," Ada said, tying the last loop around her coat. "He's got no idea how deep that water goes when it's wild." "He's still out there?" Theo asked, grabbing the flashlight. Ada didn't answer. She didn't need to. Theo nodded and followed. The road down toward the quarry was nearly gone by the time they reached it. Rivulets of water slashed through gravel and bent the ditches into new shapes. Trees shuddered under the weight of rain, their roots slipping from stone. In the distance, they saw the dam, makeshift and foolish, bulging at the seams, its earthen spine dark with saturation. Coulter Nash was there, of course, standing at the crest like a man guarding a secret he knew was about to spill. His shirt was plastered to his frame, his boots sinking an inch deeper every time he shifted his weight. When he saw Ada and Theo crest the ridge, he didn't shout, just turned his head like he wasn't surprised. And maybe he wasn't. "You need to move," Ada said, stepping up through the rain, her voice louder than thunder because it had to be. "That thing's not going to give you another hour. We've almost got the secondary ditch finished," Nash said, half shouting over the wind. "Just got to finish the channel and it'll hold." Theo stepped forward, his fingers clenched tight around the strap of his bag. "You don't get it. This isn't just floodwater. The stone's cracking. It's already started. It's not going to hold anything." Nash looked at him, eyes glassy, full of something close to panic, but held down by pride. "You're just a kid with a map and some stories. You think I'm going to shut this down because some handprints on a rock told you to?" "I think you're going to drown if you don't," Theo said. There was no time to argue. The ground let out a sound then, a groan that didn't come from trees or rock or wind. It came from underneath, deep and wide like something sighing after being held in too long. A tree gave way just south of the dam, roots tearing up a patch of earth the size of a pickup. The bank folded in on itself. The water surged forward, dark and fast, and Nash backed up instinctively, boots slipping. "Well, we have to breach it clean," Ada said, looking straight at the man who'd ruined the stream. "You either help or you get out of the way." Nash didn't answer, just looked at the wall of brown water swelling behind the makeshift levee, and knew the decision had been made for him. Theo sprinted toward the left edge, shouting instructions, and began pulling at the sandbags stacked along the narrow bypass. The goal wasn't to stop the water. It was to guide it, just enough to give it an exit that wouldn't take lives with it. Ada lit her oil lantern, shielding it from the rain with her body. The flame sputtered but held. She waved it high, signaling toward the ridge. That's when they appeared. Through the trees, in the downpour, tall figures moved. 3 of them. Massive, dark, soaked in stormlight. Their movements heavy but deliberate. The first stepped into the clearing without hesitation, bent low, and began dragging a downed cedar across the field. The second reached for a fallen branch the size of a beam and planted it into the soft earth. The third stood behind them, watching the current, reading its movement as if it were a language. Nash staggered back, eyes wide, mouth open. Theo shouted, "Help them!" And Nash did, without a word. He ran to the opposite bank and began pulling at debris, redirecting water with his bare hands. The mud fought him. So did gravity. But something in his eyes had changed. He wasn't trying to protect his claim anymore. He was trying to protect what was left of the hollow. The first rush of water hit the new gap hard, exploding outward into the floodplain. But the tree trunks held. Ada's lantern illuminated the cut, guiding the current through its new path. Rain struck sideways now, hammering faces and shoulders. The dam cracked with a sound like bone. Then it split clean down the center and let go. The force of it hit fast. Mud surged over rock, smashing into the field, tearing out fence posts and carrying them like twigs. Ada lost her footing and went under, swallowed in brown water and broken leaves. Theo screamed her name and dove after her, but the current threw him back. That's when it moved. The largest of the 3 figures, its fur matted, face locked in focus, lunged into the torrent. Its arms cut through the water like oars. It reached Ada in seconds, wrapped itself around her, and let the current take them both. Theo fought to his feet, slipping and yelling, until he saw them again, 30 yards downstream, pressed against the edge of a stone embankment. The creature rose first, lifting Ada with both arms, her body limp but alive. It set her down gently on the slope and knelt beside her, breathing heavy, head bowed. The rain had softened to a hiss. For a long moment, nothing else moved. Then she stirred, coughed, rolled onto her side. The creature let out a breath that wasn't quite a sound, more a feeling. Up on the ridge, Coulter Nash pulled Theo from the shallow trench, hands slick with mud and blood from a cut across his knuckles. "Your grandma?" he asked. Theo nodded, shivering. "She's tougher than she looks," Nash said. Back near the water, Ada opened her eyes. The creature was still kneeling, head down, its massive shoulders rising and falling with each breath. She reached up with one trembling hand and placed it gently against its arm. Mud ran down their arms together, warm from the earth. Then she sat up, slowly, and the two of them looked out across the field that was no longer a battlefield. Just soaked ground, a few broken timbers, and the steady retreat of water that had finally found somewhere to go. The other two creatures had vanished into the trees. The third stood, looked once more at Ada, then Theo, then back toward the ridge. Without a sound, it stepped into the woods, its silhouette blurring in the fog. All that remained was the sound of breath. Slow, deep, human, and not. And overhead, the rain eased to a whisper. But the valley still held its breath, because something had shifted, and there was no going back. Under the pale hush of early autumn, the hollow tried to return to itself. The flood had receded days ago, but the ground still held the memory of rushing water in every ripple of silt and branch caught in fence wire. Trees leaned like they'd been scolded by the storm. The creek now ran clearer than it had in months, but quieter too, as if unsure whether to trust its own voice again. Laurel Hollow didn't speak much. It watched, and when it did speak, it whispered in broken conversations from porches and feed store counters and shaded spots behind screen doors. Not about the storm, not about the dam, but about what someone saw in the rain. "Swear it was standing up, 2 legs, arms like fence posts." My cousin said he saw it lift her out the water like a sack of feathers. "I heard it roared, woke the cows." "It wasn't no bear." "Ain't no such thing as Bigfoot." Then silence, always the silence. At Ada's, the porch swing creaked under the weight of wet air and late-day heat. Theo sat cross-legged on the floorboards, hands fidgeting with the burned edge of a film canister. It was still warm from the fire. He'd kept the camera dry through the whole damn flood, guarded it like it held the last evidence of the truth. Because maybe it did. The film had pictures, real ones. He'd snapped them when it mattered, when the creature lifted Ada from the flood, when it stood there kneeling like it mourned more than water. One frame even caught the reflection of 2 others in the tree line, eyes glinting through the mist. He hadn't meant to take that one. The shutter just clicked, like his body knew before his mind did. He held the canister up, turning it in the light. The metal was scorched now, blackened from where it had burned beneath the ash pile. He hadn't told her he still had it. Not until that morning. Ada hadn't said much when he handed it over. Just looked at it long, the way she used to look at expectant mothers whose hands shook too much. Then she walked to the well and dropped it in the fire herself. Not because it wasn't true, but because it was. Theo sat with his knees pulled to his chest, eyes burning. "We could have shown them." Ada didn't answer right away. She was sitting on the porch rail, arms crossed, face unreadable. "You know what happens to beautiful things when you drag them into the light?" she asked finally. He didn't answer, just looked away. "They dry out," she said. "Crack open. People poke at 'em, make 'em ugly, make 'em loud." Theo looked at the well. Smoke still trailed thin from the pit beside it. "But what if it helps? What if it doesn't?" she said. "What if it just teaches people how to aim better?" The question landed heavy. Theo didn't say another word. He knew she wasn't angry. It wasn't that. She was just tired in a way he hadn't seen before. Not weak. just hollowed out. Later that afternoon, Sheriff Pike's truck crunched up the gravel drive. He didn't get out at first, just sat behind the wheel staring through the windshield like he was trying to count something far away. Then he stepped out, slow, like everything hurt. His boots hit the earth and sank just slightly into the softened clay. He walked up without ceremony, hat in one hand, raincoat folded over the other. "Word spreading," he said, voice low. Ada nodded once. "They're scared. Some are curious, sure, but mostly scared." "That's always the louder one," she replied. Pike looked past her toward the ash pile, the faint hiss of burned metal still cooling beneath dirt. "Someone at the diner said you burned the proof," he said. "I did." He shifted his weight, lips pressing together like he wanted to argue, but he didn't. "I should ask why," he finally said. "You already know." He sighed through his nose. "You want me to deny what I saw?" "No," she said. "I want you to carry it. That's different." The silence that followed wasn't cold. It was respectful, like two veterans standing over the same scar. Pike turned to go, then stopped. "Something left a stone at your well," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "Round, looked placed." "I saw it this morning," Ada replied. "Didn't move it." He didn't ask why. Just tipped his head and walked back to his truck. When he was gone, Theo went down to the well again. The stone sat where Pike had said. Smooth, karst white, shaped like an egg but not perfect. Weathered in a way that said it hadn't been made, just chosen. There were faint grooves on it. Not symbols, not letters, just the weight of fingers that had held it. Theo crouched beside it, hands in his lap. "You think it's a message?" "It's an answer," Ada said behind him. "Not to a question, to a promise." That night they didn't light any lamps. The air was still warm, and the windows open. Crickets had come back cautiously, like survivors. The well clicked and dripped again, its voice stronger, clearer. The world had shifted its weight, but not too much. Theo sat by the fire pit, the flames low now, eyes glazed over with thought. "Do you think they'll come back?" he asked quietly. Ada didn't answer for a long time. Then she stepped onto the porch, holding something in her hand. It was a folded piece of paper. His sketch. The one with the water lines, the guardian's mark, the stream's original path. She held it over the flame. "I think they never left," she said, and let it go. The fire took it in one breath. The lines curled and vanished into ash. From somewhere deep in the trees, a sound moved. Not wind, not voice, something older than either. It came and went in one breath, and in the flicker of flame across Theo's face, his eyes weren't afraid. They were grateful. Under the weight of a mid-October sky, the valley breathed again, slowly, like someone coming out of a long sleep. The trees around Laurel Hollow had started to turn, dressing the ridges in copper and gold, though the light this season always felt a little thinner, like it had to pass through something unseen before it touched the ground. The kind of light that made people speak quieter, walk slower, look down more. You could feel it in the soil too, cooler now, softened by the rains, grateful and bruised. And in the hollowed-out places where floodwater had stripped the roots bare, there were hands at work again, not the machines this time. Hands. Calloused, tired human hands. Coulter Nash worked alone near the northern edge of the creek. The house he'd grown up in had been sold off months ago, and the quarry was closed now, barred by the sheriff and abandoned by the crew that once moved like ants across the limestone face. There'd been no lawsuits, no headlines, just a slow turning away. That's how it always ended in Laurel Hollow. Not with sirens, but with absence. He'd taken to showing up just after sunrise, tools slung across his back, boots caked with yesterday's work. The others came too, one by one. Neighbors who once shouted his name in anger now handed him stones without saying much. They laid them side by side along the banks where the current had torn through, built new paths, reinforced old ones. dug shallow troughs by hand to guide the runoff back into the forgotten stream beds. No one called it penance, but maybe it was. And maybe that was enough. From her porch, Ada watched them. She didn't join, not because she didn't believe in the work, but because her hands were needed elsewhere. She made coffee for whoever passed through, shared cloth, carved out old cedar stakes, quiet offerings for quiet change. The land, after all, had its own memory. It didn't need permission to forgive. Just time, and someone willing to kneel. One afternoon, long past lunch, Nash stayed behind when the others packed up. He didn't speak as they left, just kept working the bank near the curve in the stream, where the water cut deepest. He moved slower now, his movements heavier than they'd been weeks ago, not from age, but from thought. When the last wheelbarrow creaked away down the trail, he stood with his back to the trees and listened, and then he saw it, not approaching, just there, like it had always been there. Across the water, half hidden by a veil of branches, the figure stood still as stone. It didn't move, didn't blink, just watched, towering, wide-shouldered, covered in a coat of dark matted fur that shimmered in the low light like wet pine bark. Its breath rose in short clouds, visible even in the afternoon warmth. Coulter didn't reach for anything, didn't flinch. He just stared. The stream between them ran quiet, and then the creature stepped forward. Just one pace, enough to catch the sun across its face. It was the first time Nash had truly seen it. Not in the corner of his eye, not behind fear, but in full. The face wasn't animal, wasn't beast. It was something older, wiser. The eyes were deep set, not with suspicion, but with knowing. As if it had seen too many winters and still waited for one worth staying through. It didn't growl, didn't speak, just lowered itself, slowly, deliberately, to the edge of the stream, one knee to the earth. It bent forward, brought one massive hand to the water, and drank. The act was so plain, so human. Nash felt his throat tighten. He didn't know why. He watched it cup the water, bring it to its mouth, repeat the motion. No hunger, no show, just need. Then it looked up, not at him, not through him, with him. He couldn't explain it later. Not to Ada, not to the sheriff, not even to himself. But in that moment, Coulter Nash did something he'd never done for anyone, not even God. He dropped his hat, stepped forward, and knelt. The cold water soaked his jeans, his boots, crept into the old scabbed cuts across his palms. He didn't reach for the creature, didn't say anything at all. Just leaned forward, scooped the same water in his own hands, and drank. It tasted like stone and memory. When he looked up again, the creature was gone. Only the water remained, rippling faintly where the hand had been. Back at the house, Ada sat at the kitchen table, folding a piece of cloth with slow, precise fingers. Theo leaned against the wall nearby, arms crossed, watching the light fade across the floor. He was out there a long time today, Theo said. Ada nodded, eyes on the needle. You think it changes anything? He asked. She paused, tied the thread, snipped it clean. I think it already has, she said. That night, Coulter returned to his small rented trailer near the edge of town. He washed the mud from his hands, sat on the porch with a bottle he didn't open, and listened. And somewhere far beyond the lights of Laurel Hollow, in a place the maps no longer showed, something massive moved through the trees with the grace of silence. It didn't need thanks, only witness. And that, finally, it had. The air had shifted again. Lighter now, touched with the slow sweetness of early November. The last of the maple leaves clung stubborn on the high branches, but most had fallen, carpeting Laurel Hollow in rust and saffron and pale yellow. They moved in waves across the valley floor with each breeze, as if the land itself was breathing again, exhaling something it had held in too long. And above all that breath, stretching wide across the sky, came the slow rise of smoke and fiddle music from the harvest festival. People came early this year. Not just from town, but from farther out. Folks from Granger's Ridge and Coldwater Hollow, even a few strangers parked in dusty cars at the edge of the gravel trail. They came carrying pie tins and folding chairs and mason jars of last summer's jam. Some came just to listen. Others, maybe, because they had felt something since the flood they couldn't explain, but knew better than to ignore. Something that lived beneath words, beneath reason. Something that made them look a little longer at the forest line before stepping outside at night. The old schoolhouse clearing had been repurposed into a commons now. No one made a big announcement about it. It just happened. Ada had signed the land over to the Laurel Hollow Trust earlier that fall, quietly, with no ceremony. But word got out. The property that had once belonged to her father's father's father now carried a sign carved by hand, for healing, for rest, for the remembered. Beneath it, the old stone path had been cleared of overgrowth, and under the shade of the hickory trees, folding tables appeared. Kids ran through the leaves barefoot, chasing each other with caramel apples and wool scarves trailing behind them like ribbons. A Vietnam vet named Leonard, who hadn't spoken much since '75, stood beside an elder from Dry Creek and built a cedar bench without a single word between them. A woman from Three Forks brought a pot of venison stew and served it from the tailgate of her truck, laughing until she cried. And in the center of it all, the bonfire grew steady, its crackles settling deep into people's spines like a song they'd almost forgotten. Theo stood near the circle of hay bales, arms tucked around a book of old legends. He didn't look like a boy anymore, though he wasn't quite a man either. There was something steadier about him now, like the hollow itself had taken root in him and was blooming slow, quiet, and sure. He cleared his throat once, held the firelight in his eyes, and began to tell a story. Long ago, before roads, before rails, before names stuck to land like signs on a fence, this valley breathed different. It didn't belong to people. It belonged to water, to stone, to the ones who walked quiet and left no words behind. The ones who watched, listened, guarded the springs and marked the rock with memories. The crowd hushed without being told. He continued, voice clear and even, carrying in that soft Appalachian rhythm that seemed to draw time out longer between syllables. They weren't monsters, not spirits, not myths. They were something else. A reminder, maybe, that we aren't the first ones here, or the only ones who hurt when water's stolen from the ground, when stones split too deep, when grief goes unanswered. He glanced across the fire then, just briefly, and Ada met his gaze. She was seated in her wooden chair, wrapped in the wool shawl that used to belong to her sister. Her hair was thinner now, pulled into a soft braid that fell over her shoulder like river grass. Her eyes weren't sharp anymore, but they still knew how to see. Each morning she still walked to the well. Not because she needed water. It had been plumbed in years ago, but because it still spoke, and she hadn't stopped listening. She carried her old stethoscope made from wood and twine and pressed it to the stones. Sometimes she stayed just a minute, sometimes longer. She never told Theo what she heard, but each time she returned, her shoulders sat a little lighter, like someone had whispered something kind into her spine. At the fire circle, Theo had finished the story. He closed the book gently and sat back down without waiting for applause. He didn't want it. The music picked up again. Fiddle, banjo, the low hum of harmonies rising out of the dark like mist. And in the lull between songs, a sound came from farther off. Not loud, not near, just steady. Footsteps through wet leaves, then silence. Then the faintest huff of breath. Huckle, old now, gray around the muzzle, lifted his head from where he lay near the fire and stared across the field. His tail didn't wag. He just watched. And then slowly dipped his head low, muzzle to the dirt, ears soft. No one noticed right away, but Ada did. She looked up, past the light, past the circle of hay and fire. toward the ridge where the moon had just begun to rise. And there, half hidden by mist and night, a silhouette stood at the edge of the trees. Too tall to be a man, too still to be a dream. It didn't move, just watched. The light caught the side of its face, just enough to see the fur matted with dew, the curve of a massive shoulder, the gleam of one amber eye reflecting firelight like an ember that never went out. Ida smiled, not because she was surprised, but because she wasn't. Her hand drifted to the old cedar pendant at her neck. Not jewelry, just a sliver she'd carved herself. Something to remember, to honor. The creature raised one arm, slow, and placed its hand against a low-hanging branch beside it. It didn't wave, didn't gesture, just rested there, present. Then it turned and stepped into the dark. Gone, but not lost. Later that night, when the music quieted and the embers burned low, Ada stayed behind. Theo walked her back to the well like he always did. The air smelled of smoke and apples and cedar. When they reached the stones, she stopped and leaned forward, resting her hand on the rim like it was an old friend. Theo held out the stethoscope, but she shook her head. "I don't need it tonight," she said. Instead, she closed her eyes, laid her hand against the cold stones, and listened. The wind moved across the grass. The water below shifted once, and from deep in the dark of the earth, something answered. Not with sound, with memory, with the weight of something kept safe. She whispered, "Still here." And the well, as always, listened back. Theo didn't speak. He stood beside her, arms folded, eyes on the stars. The silence wasn't empty now. It was full of stories, of breath, of gratitude. And though no one said it, everyone in the hollow that night felt it too. That some things, when left unnamed and unharmed, don't disappear. They simply return, just like water does, finding its way back, always. Sometimes, what we fear the most isn't what lives deep in the forest. It's what lives quietly inside us. The ache of guilt left too long unattended. The silence we carry in place of forgiveness. The way we forget the land remembers, even when we don't. And maybe, just maybe, the most extraordinary thing in this world isn't what we can prove or catch on film, but what we choose to protect even when no one's watching. Because some stories aren't meant to be headlines. Some truths don't survive under spotlights. They live in gestures, in the way hands reach out instead of retreat, in how strangers kneel beside each other to rebuild something they once helped destroy, in the choice to keep beauty hidden, not out of fear, but out of reverence. The world doesn't always need to be explained. Sometimes it just needs to be felt. And in a place like this, in the quiet hush of a hollow long forgotten by the maps, you learn that healing doesn't come from answers. It comes from presence, from listening, from standing still long enough to notice that the earth still speaks, even if not in our language. There are no perfect endings, no neat little bows to tie around the hard parts. But perhaps that's the point. That life, like water, finds its own way forward, not in straight lines, but in curves shaped by stone and time and choice. And in those curves, we're reminded that the things we lose, trust, wonder, connection, can be found again if we're willing to see with softer eyes. So, if this story touched something in you, something tender, something curious, something quietly aching to be understood, know that you're not alone. We are all, in some way, trying to remember what it means to be part of something larger than ourselves, to be stewards instead of conquerors, to leave behind something gentler than what we inherited. Thank you for listening, for feeling, for staying with us until the end. And if this story moved you, even in a small way, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What did it awaken in you? What would you have done, standing at the edge of that forest? If you'd like more stories like this, stories that whisper rather than shout, that ask instead of tell, consider subscribing to the channel. It helps us keep creating the kind of narratives that stay with you long after the last word fades. Until next time, take care of the land, take care of each other, and always, always listen closely. Sometimes, the most important things aren't the ones we see. They're the ones we choose to protect.